Okay, so I get this over here. It's a little bit of extra microphone for us. So as you know, this is ARC 252, and it's going to do another tutorial. Try and keep it tight. We're going to do curtain wall. I know that again, I'd said that I would do this a couple different tutorials for us. I think that I'll try and keep it, call it focused on what we need for the best in town office example. But I do think I'm going to kind of expand a little bit for us. And what we'll do is we'll talk about what's in the best in town version, and then give you some of the tools to get at some other pieces within Revit, so you can understand how to use the curtain wall tool in a more meaningful way on other projects. Maybe you got some other projects you started in studio or in the future. And I think some of this will help you. Curtain wall can be challenging in itself, but we'll start with the basics and see how far we can get. So why don't we just get started here? And I'm going to share my screen. Boom. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up just the architectural template. We'll start with that, and I'll just show you a couple things, the kind of pieces that make up the curtain wall family. I think it's a strong way to start this. And then we can look at where we need to get to for our little curtain wall family inside of Best in Town. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Let's grab our new architectural template. Hit OK. Should be able to populate just a little screen here of stuff. Okay, this is just our standard template. Again, we've got our floor plans, ceiling plans already pre-set. One thing that's probably going to be helpful for us is to draw it a little bit in 3D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap between plan view and 3D view. But one thing that we should probably just start with here is the curtain wall itself. So much like a regular wall, you draw a curtain wall using the wall tool. So that can be a little bit confusing because you might see these other curtain wall, curtain system, curtain grid, mullion within our little build panel here up on the architecture ribbon. Don't use these. We're not going to use these to draw our curtain wall. This can be for a very different case. So it's all good. These can make up parts of our curtain wall. Don't worry about these for now. We'll get to these. So what I want you to do is click on our little drop down here. We've got a couple different styles of wall we can draw. And let's just go to wall architectural for now. Per usual, we see in our type selector tool here, we got our type selector. We got basic wall selected. Now what I want you to do is just drop that menu down, and you'll see we've got all of our walls, and then we've got just down here, we've actually got our curtain wall. So down here, pre-built inside of our Revit standard template, we have some of our curtain wall families that exist inside of the Revit interface. Curtain wall empty, curtain wall exterior glazing, and curtain wall storefront. So for us today, I'm thinking that we do curtain wall storefront. I think this is probably the safest way for everybody to see a couple of the parts, the bits and bops of how the curtain wall comes together. I would argue this is its kind of own world of stuff, but you do see it here in the wall families. So much like a wall, we start by drawing the wall. It's like a wall, we just start by drawing the wall. So let's do this. So let's grab the curtain wall storefront in our type selector, click that, and you'll see very similar to our wall tool, because we're in our wall tool, we've got a base constraint. We have the base offset. So how high above our reference level do we want that thing to be? And then our top constraint and our unconnected height. So in this case, this is saying we're going to draw a wall, in this case, a curtain wall, that's going to be start from level 0 and go up 8 meters or 8,000 millimeters. You can modify these. So much like a regular wall, we can modify these to say, I only want it to go up to level 1. Maybe I want it to go, instead of level 1, I want it to go up 5,000 instead of 8,000, and these types of things. Very similar to a wall tool in that when we go to draw it, it's going to simulate a wall. So let's just go, and what I'll do now is, why don't we, I'm going to change this back to 8,000. This is our kind of default setting. And we've got the curtain wall storefront selected here. And let's just do this. Let's do this. Let's draw a wall. Doesn't really matter how long it is. I just want you to see the tool itself. Do 6 meters. So let's just draw a wall. Click once, click twice, double tap escape. We should have a little wall piece set up in here. So kind of just looks like a couple panes of glass, right? So a couple panes of glass here. Kind of hard to see. If we just zoom in a little bit, we can see that it's been broken up into these little pieces. But the overall wall itself is 6 meters. So it's 6 meters here from east to west. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump to our 3D. So let's jump to our 3D view. And I'll show you a little bit about the kind of components that are built in within the curtain wall system itself. So let's jump over here to our 3D view. So remember our little default 3D view. Let's click that. You can see immediately we've got a bunch of stuff happening, right? So I'm just going to turn these off for now. Oops. Actually, let's leave these on. It's okay. So what's the first thing we notice? We notice that the wall that we've generated, we said we want to start at level 0, so that looks good. Revit is obeying the things that we're saying. Level 0, and then it's going to go up 8 meters. So this is an 8-meter high wall. But you can see there's a couple other things going on here. We've got the wall itself. So if I just kind of hover over our 3D element here, I can see the wall. It's hard to explain. You'll see what I mean when we get into more detail here, but the wall itself is made up of this 6 meter, because we know it's 6 meters by 8-meter high wall. And then within that itself, we have all of these extra kind of bits, components that exist within the curtain wall system itself. So the wall itself, the grids, so if you just kind of hover over our model here, you'll see this dashed line. And you can also see it in the bottom left corner here of my screen, curtain wall grids, grid line. So the way that curtain walls are set up is that we actually organize the wall itself into a set of vertical and horizontal grids. So these are the grids. So we have these vertical grids. So vertical grids all hanging out. The edges don't have grids, right? So these are the edges of our wall, but within the kind of interior curtain wall grids exist here. They're all pinned, which you see this little pin here. So make sure you don't touch that for now. We'll get to that. Little curtain wall grids. And then we've also got these horizontal grids. And these horizontal grids exist, again, on the interior side of our curtain wall. In this case, we also have the panels. So I tried to do this in class, but let's just slow it down a little bit. What you can do is you can tap the tab key. So tap the tab key on your keyboard. Now I've got the whole wall kind of highlighted. I haven't selected anything. It's just saying, do you want to select the whole wall? Hit tab again. And now I have the kind of third part of the curtain wall assembly itself. So let's click on that. And what you'll see is that in our type selector now, we have a system panel selected. So a system panel, or a panel, is the third part of our curtain wall family itself. So we have the overall wall, we have the curtain wall grids, and then we have the system panel families themselves. So in this case, we have right built into Revit, we got a couple different system families. This is going to system panels. We have a glazed panel, and we should have a solid panel. So for us, and an empty panel. So we've got for us, we've got. I just scroll up here to our type selector. But scroll all the way down. We can see these two. So right now we've got a glazed panel and a solid panel. So this just gives you a little bit of flexibility within the curtain wall to kind of select pieces of this wall that you might want to have be solid. In the case of something like spandrel panel, we might, instead of it being glazed or a glass portion, vision panels we call them, we might want what's called a spandrel panel or an opaque panel. In this case, in Revit, we call it a solid panel. So somewhere where light is not passing through, it's not a glazed panel per se. So if we wanted to swap one of these panels, what we do is we come up and tab select. Got our one panel here, and come over to the type selector. I'll show you what this looks like. And we can hit solid. So we're going to come all the way down here and hit solid. click off, and now you can see that within the Revit family, we've now got a couple of clear panels, and now we've introduced this spandrel or this solid panel. This can be really helpful, again, when we're doing spandrel panels across things like slabs in our building. For the best in town example, we don't need this, but I just wanted to show you the tool itself. So a simple way to kind of get this back is to, if we want this just to be all glazed, is to just come across. You can actually see how we've got, if I select all of these panels, well, now actually I've got multiple things selected. I happen to also select my levels. So remember, if we've selected a lot of things, what we can do is we can come up here to the filter tool, click that, and we can see all of the pieces that we've selected. So we've got the curtain panels, we've got the curtain wall grids, and we've got the levels. So for us, all we want to swap out, we want to change that single opaque curtain wall panel back to a regular glazed panel. So let's just go ahead and we'll click off, click off levels, and then click off curtain wall grids, hit OK. And now you can see in the type selector pool, type selector in the properties palette, we've got system panel, multiple types selected. So Revit is saying, okay, cool, you've got these 4 panels, but within this curtain wall, we've got glazed unit, and then we also have a solid unit. And what we can do is we can just drop down here and we can change this system panel back to glazed. So we'll change that back to a glazed panel. A lot of fidelity, a lot of control within this system, and then just click off of it and we'll get all of this back. Right. So next thing, so we've got, let's just start with the constraints. So let's start with the constraints here. Remember, in 3D, we can do a couple things here. We can change the overall height. So anyways, go ahead and let's change our top constraint from unconnected to just up to level 1. And let's see what happens to the grid. So let's grab it. Click that, hit our little apply, boom, done. So you might notice that the overall height of the first panel down here has remained the same. And then above, we've actually truncated or cut off the second panel, the vertical panel here. And that's because Revit has some instructions to do this. So they are built into the default, but what we can do is we can modify them, we can change them however we like to do. So just so you can see, we'll swap this back to unconnected, and let's just make sure that we put this back to 8,000. Hit apply. We should see everything kind of populate and go up. If I click back on the wall here, one thing we can do is the justification of the windows, excuse me, the panels themselves. So justification, much like you would see in your text, we can justify where we actually want these grid lines for the curtain wall grids to start and stop. And those are going to be within our little properties palette over here. So on the left, we can see if I'm just going to, right now I've got nothing selected. If I select the wall, the entire curtain wall family itself, we can see over here in the vertical grid, we can see that we've got the number of grids here. So the vertical grid and the horizontal grid. So vertical, right? And then horizontal grid. So we've got 2 different sets of grids that are going to help us lay out whatever curtain wall we'd like to do. And I'll show you. So on the vertical grid side here, we can see there's going to be a couple different settings here for the vertical grid. And let's just see the justification. So beginning, I drop this down, we see the end or the center. So why don't we just go ahead, let's just try end here and see what we get. So vertical grid adjustment, let's hit end, see what happens. You don't really notice a change here because our kind of wall is of a reasonable size. We go to center here, again, same thing. We don't notice a big change. I'm going to just set that back to beginning for now. The horizontal grid, the kind of these grids across, we'll see what happens when we justify this, you'll see a small change, and I want you to see what happens here. So again, I've still got my curtain wall selected. Let's just jump here. Let's hit end, and you should see a change. So let's do this, right? So what we've done is we've modified where the curtain wall grid is going to start. So instead of starting at the bottom, it's now starting at the end. And you can see now we've got this little zone down here that's flipped. So if you missed it, go back to beginning here, hit apply, see how that entire thing has flipped. The last one, center. So if we hit center, it's actually going to split those two. So let's do that. Hit center, and then you can see now we've actually split the overall vertical, the horizontal grid here, so that we've split them vertically between the top and bottom. So this can be really helpful for things like if you're just trying to get your pattern on your building, your pattern, somebody's asked you to do this. Yeah, it's another tool when we're looking at these curtain wall grids to kind of adjust them. I would argue for the most part, you're probably going to keep it to the standard, which is the beginning. And then we can manipulate some other things within the family. So let's just hit that beginning here. It's all good. That looks pretty reasonable for me. So I should mention that these are instance parameters. So remember back to our window family, our parametric window family, these are instance parameters. So if I was to generate another wall of curtain wall, we would end up with a very similar situation. We can change these per instance of this curtain wall. So things like if I was to create a second set of an identical curtain wall, I would have to change it in each instance of that curtain wall that's been generated. That being said, say we wanted to change some overall things. We wanted to change some overall things within the type parameters. So we want to make sure that we can actually now look at a couple things here. So let's get back into the type parameters. So if we click on the overall curtain wall, we got storefront in here. We can come up here to the edit type. Click that. You bet we got another menu, right? So all of these menus hanging out here. I'm just gonna make this a little bit more palatable for us here. Couple different settings that we can see here. So, turn that off. A couple different settings we can see here. We've got the function, which we've got the exterior, or in this case, we could say any of these. We're going to keep to exterior for now. That's cool. I'm not sure why my Revit keeps jumping across here. We'll try and make this work as we go. Yeah, it keeps doing this. I'm not sure why. Dragon Curtsy. Okay, so one thing we might be able to change if we wanted to, again, this is a type parameter, so we can actually modify the entire curtain panel. So right now we've got none, and none means that we can kind of, these curtain panels, that means that we can adjust them per panel. So none is, I would argue, probably the thing that you're going to do the most because you're going to want some degree of control over the panels within your little curtain wall family here. However, if you did want to set all of them to one specific type of panel, we can do that and drop down and you'll see, I should mention this, you can have any type of wall within a curtain wall. So a curtain wall is broken up our system into this grid of different types of walls. So you could, in theory, and I should mention this, this is definitely an aside. We do not need to do this. I have in a different life done a precast concrete set of curtain walls because what you can do is you can adjust, as we've seen, you can adjust different panels. If you want to get a pattern going, you want to get the right spacing for your precast assemblies. This is a way to generate those panels across an entire building envelope. For us, we're just going to be worried about glazed panels or solid panels. That's it. I just want you to see when we do see this curtain panel here, really the ones that we're looking for are going to be all the way where it says all the way down here to system panel. I should also mention this got me very early on getting started in Revit was in your head, you might think, okay, I'm going to set my panel to curtain wall, which of course would make sense. However, what that's doing is it's telling Revit to put a curtain wall within a curtain wall panel, and that's going to double up. It's essentially a little inception, right? So we got a curtain wall within a curtain wall. We don't need to do that. We're just looking at the system panels here. So scroll down, we'll see all the way down the bottom here, system panel glazed, system panel solid. For our purposes, that's all I want you to do. If I hit system panel solid here, let's go ahead and do that. And I hit apply. Boom. Let's just jump out of this super quick. We can see that now all of my panels have been set to be a system panel that is an opaque or a solid panel. I try and do this. I don't actually know if I can come back in and change it. So you can't. So this is, I just want to make sure that we can all see this. So because I've done that within the type parameters, and if you've done this, this can catch people from a troubleshooting perspective, is that now, instead of being able to, like we were doing before, instead of being able to swap just one or two panels, you'll see no matter how much I click, no matter how much I'm frustrated with Revit, I can't do it. And the reason I say this is because it's more about finding why something won't work in Revit than why it will work, if that makes sense. So in this case, you're doing a job, you go, oh my goodness, why can't I change this system panel? Likely, it's because it's been set up in what our type parameter is. It's kind of set. We can't change the instance of that panel. So we got to jump back up to edit type. And what we would do is set it to none, which is all the way at the top. If I jump back in, I hit none, hit apply, nothing will change. We will still have all of our solid panels here, but it should, if I tab select, should now let me modify one of these pieces. Again, this just it will catch you. It could catch you. There are many things that can go wrong inside of the Revit interface. This is just one of those things. If it happens to be set as a type parameter, you will be unable to make modifications. So why don't we go ahead and let's go back into our edit type here, and we'll set this to, sorry, none. Just leave it at none. So that's perfect. Leave it at none. That's cool. Hit OK. And now what we can do is let's go ahead and why don't we tab select? I want to show you this. Let me tab select here. And this is another nifty little piece here, is that we can actually right click and we should be able to see this little select panels. And if, for instance, you wanted to change all of the panels within the vertical or the horizontal grid or the panels on the host, what we can do is we can do that. So if I was to go in here and say along vertical grid, you guessed it, we'll get all of the panels on the vertical grid. We can go ahead and swap out those for a glazed panel. You can see here, you can imagine now why this is important. We can start to kind of lay out different orientations, different panel layouts for things like, you know, glazing versus spandrel versus all of these types of assemblies. So for us, I'm actually more interested in just making everything glazed for us for now. Let's just go ahead and select everything. Come up to our filter tool, check none, click the curtain wall panels. We'll get all 16 selected here. Hit OK. Let's just swap those back in our type selector back to glazed. Perfect. Let's get that back to glazed in there. So a couple more things in here. I'm going to jump back into our type selector. So click the wall itself, hit edit type. And a couple other things here. We got the vertical grid and we got the horizontal grid. And you can see the little layout here. So what that's saying is we've got a couple different settings here in our vertical grid. And this is saying the maximum allowable spacing. So the maximum allowable spacing for our, it's a little bit confusing. for our vertical grid, so the vertical grid is the up and down, right? So the up and down grid is 1524 millimeters. So that's saying that you can definitely go smaller than 1524 millimeters, but you cannot go bigger than that. So as soon as Revit sees that you have a curtain wall grid that is beyond 1524, it's going to say, okay, we need a new grid. So I'll give you an example here. Why don't we go ahead and we'll change this from 1524 and we'll change it to 1000. So let's go in here. And if we hit apply, we should see more grids. So let's go ahead and do that. Hit apply. Ta-da. So more grids. So this can be super helpful. This can be super helpful when we are generating curtain walls, because this means that we can kind of set some parameters, right? Some parameters for how much space is going to be between our mullions, or in this case, between our vertical grid. Change it to anything. Change it to 5,000. I would advise against 5,000, but if we do that, we only got 2. Magical. All right, so magical stuff. And there's a couple other things we can do in here. So maximum spacing, it's kind of automatically doing all of the algebra. I guess it's algebra, all the math, right? All the math to get to what is the maximum allowable spacing based on a value. And this can be super helpful because we don't like doing all that math, right? So all that math, you've got an opening, you've got a piece of wall, and we can actually set this up to say, this is the maximum allowable spacing for most of our projects. I should say a pretty standard dimension is set 1524. That's 5 feet. That's a pretty optimal size of glass. I would say the most cost-effective size of glass. So let's go back and let's just change that to 1500 and hit apply. So the layout, you'll notice that there is a little drop down here. We can do a couple things here. We can change it to a fixed distance. So this is a kind of, okay, we're not as worried about, reaching that maximum, that optimized equal spacing. So we can say fixed distance, we'll make them all the same. And why don't we just go ahead and we'll swap that for fixed distance. So let's do that, try that out. Hit apply, and what we should see is a kind of additional little pieces. Let's see what we get. Oh, actually for us, this is 6,000. So this is going to split it into a perfect 4. So you're not going to see any change. But if I was to swap this to, let's swap to something that's not going to fit in 6,000. Let's do, it's a good number here, 850. It's not going to work. Whoops. 850. And let's hit apply and let's see what happens. So let's hit apply. Well, 850 actually looks like it fits pretty good too. So let's see if we can let's do something bigger here. Let's go back to our 2,500. That'll give us a good number here. There we go. It's a little bit just so you can see what Revit is trying to do. And we can see we've got that fixed distance of those big panels are 2,500, so 2,500 millimeters. And then again, back to the idea of math, we've got 2,500, 2,500, and then this last panel I know is going to be 1,000 from this grid line to the outside. But again, just a helpful way to get to overall mullion spacing, we call it. So the mullion spacing or the grid spacing of this mullion within the curtain wall family. Try another one. So fixed number. So this is a slightly different variation. So again, we are setting parameters for this, but a fixed number. And what that's going to let us do is change the number of mullions that we're going to have based on a number of mullions. So instead of it being based on a spacing, we're going to do it based on a number of mullions. So for us, let's just let's keep going here. I would say that's a pretty rare one to use. Maximum spacing, which we've done. So maximum spacing is the kind of out of the box version. If I go ahead and I come back to our 1500 here, hit apply, that's going to do our equal spacing. So 1500 per panel. Next one, minimum spacing. So this is the minimum size that we want. So let's go ahead, try this at 1,000 here. So 1,000 is not going to work because it's a perfect split. Let's try 950 and see what we get. Apply. So you'll see now that we've got, again, equal spacing with a minimum dimension of 950, right? So we're actually going the opposite way from our maximum spacing. So anything above 950 is going to be truncated. So looking good here. I would argue that the most common one, maximum spacing, set it to 1500, probably good to go. Very similar thing for our horizontal grid. So if we go ahead and we change the dimensions here, we've got fixed distance right now. We can actually modify this to say you want to do a 3 meter panel. We can of course do that. If we hit apply, we should see these panels, the panel grid jump. So let's do that. Hit apply, and you see the panel grid jump. So now this first panel, 3000, second panel, 3000, and so on. Very similarly, we can do all of those same modifications to the horizontal grid that we could do to the vertical grid, giving us a lot of control over how the system is working. So pretty useful. Curtain walls are a part of how we make buildings, so it can be useful for how we're putting these curtain walls together in our projects. I'm going to leave it as fixed distance right now, which is fine. And now, why don't we do, you know what, we'll stay here. We'll stay here for now. So one thing I noticed was that we actually don't have any of the mullions turned on. So for whatever reason in Revit 2025, they've changed it so none of the mullions are actually on in this version for our curtain wall storefront family. So our curtain wall storefront family. So what we can do is we can turn some on. And that's another kind of key setting within the type parameters. So we've got the type parameters hanging out here, vertical mullions. So you can see there's a couple different types in here. So interior type, and that's going to be all of the interior vertical mullions. So 1, 2, 3, the interior. So inside of the frame of our wall here, we can see these interior mullion types. So if I was to go ahead, and this is going to be again another drop-down menu, we've got a couple of built-in mullion types within our little family here. So circular mullions, rectangular mullions. These are just going to be for demonstration purposes. Even a 50 by 150 is a strange size for a mullion, but for us, okay, we're just looking at the demonstration. Let's do rectangular mullion, 30 millimeters square. Click that, hit apply, and we should see the interior vertical mullions. We should see them populate along the curtain wall grids that we've generated. So let's hit apply, boom. So I can't scroll within this menu, but you can kind of see that we've got these vertical elements that are actually holding the glass in place, right? So these vertical rectangular mullions holding the glass in place. And border type, border one type. So let's get here. So if we're going to built in, we're going to give ourselves, maybe we'll give ourselves the rectangular mullion down here, the 50 by 150. You can see there's a couple other options here. There's a couple of other options, but for us, we'll do rectangular mullion, 50 by 150. Select that, hit apply, and we should see our vertical. Oh, I see. It's only happened on the one side. So this is border one type is on this side, and then border two type is going to be on the other side. So let's make sure that we select these both. And let's give ourselves a rectangular mullion 50 by 150, hit apply, and you can see it populate now on both sides. So the borders are also broken down into pieces of the curtain wall. Similar for our horizontal mullions. Say, for instance, we just swap this from interior type none to, let's go here, 30 millimeters square. Hit apply. We should see, real time, we've got this wonderful set of these two interior mullions happening. Do the same thing for our rectangular mullion, 50 by 150. Same thing for the border type 2. Rectangular mullion, and then hit apply, and we should see top, bottom, inside, all good. We've got this wonderful little curtain wall system all set up. So hit OK. Let's hit OK. Actually, one last thing. So how do we set up a wall type tag? Just because we're here, how do we set up a wall type tag? Just like a standard wall in Revit, we have this little type mark down here in our identity data. So if you were wondering, Why can't I tag the curtain wall? He said it was just like the wall. We also have to give it some information so that Revit will know, how do I annotate this wall? How do I get that type mark in there? And for us, I think we call it P4. So let's just call this P4, capital P4, and hit apply. We'll come back to this, but just hit apply. For us, this is useful. Hit OK. And now just back to the curtain wall itself. So looking all right, looking all right. You might notice we've got an additional kind of piece within our curtain wall family now, right? So we've just added in our mullions. So remember, we've got the wall. Oops. We've got the curtain wall grid. We've got the curtain wall panel, if I can select it here. So the curtain wall panel has been selected. And then now we've also got these handy dandy little curtain wall mullions. So that would be the fourth element that make up our curtain wall. 4 pieces, all really important as part of the curtain wall assembly. So one thing that might make you crazy is that you can see how these, what's called a vertical join, is happening in here. So this might make us crazy. For the purposes of best in town, this is a little advanced, but this is okay. I'll show you how to kind of modify this. So if you're like, man, I hate how this works, this is so blah, blah, blah. What we can do is we're actually going to swap how this join works. And you might see if we just kind of hover over our wall, what I'm doing is I'm hitting tab to select our mullion piece. And we should see this little toggle mullion join. And this is, again, Revit is complicated piece of software. If I hit this mullion join, boom, it's going to modify that little piece. So this could be a little tedious. You know, imagine doing this 1,000 times. Get a big curtain wall system. But the idea here is that we can kind of clean up how those mullions are interfacing. So we're going to end up with the same thing on the bottom. Just come through, select the mullion, hit this little tiny little T intersection, and you'll see this little toggle mullion join. Boom, good to go. So that's the kind of main things about how we've got the curtain wall system set up, right? One thing we might want to do is, we saw how we can set up the grids. So now what we can do is we've actually got the potential. If I just tab select here, I'm going to try and modify. You can see how challenging it can be to get to these grids once everything's set in place. So sometimes what I like to do, select everything, come up to the filter, and you can see here, even though it's really hard to see, that curtain wall grid does exist. I'm going to turn off the curtain wall monitor, or rather not select it, hit OK. And now I can actually start to mess around with our curtain wall grid. So if I wanted to modify this, the mullion is going to follow where that curtain wall grid has been set up. And for us, what we might want to do is if I was just to try and modify it now, I'm going to end up with an error. The reason I'm going to end up with an error is you can see this little pin here. That means that things have been set. It's been pinned. You can't change it. So let's just go ahead and try this. I don't think it's going to let me do it. Let's change this to 3000 from that witness line. Let's change this to 3000, hit enter. You're going, my goodness, why isn't this working? Pulling out your hair, hopefully not getting too upset. But in fact, this little pin, which is vague and totally not helpful unless you know what it's doing. And what we want to do is we want to unpin this horizontal grid here. So we're going to try and unpin that horizontal grid. A couple ways you can do it. You can jump up here to the modify panel and hit our little unpin. So unpin is going to let us unpin this piece of grid. We can also click on the actual pin itself. So this little icon here, if we just click, you'll see it's now become an unpinned element. So what's useful about this is now we should see what we can do. We should be able to modify this. Let's make this 3000. You can see now we've got some, we've got some ability to change that grid. right? We can do the same thing if we wanted to grab this one down here. I'm going to do the same thing, filter, check none, hit our curtain wall grid, hit OK. Got to unpin. And then instead of using the witness lines, I'm actually just going to move it. So let's move the curtain wall grid up by 800 or so. You might want to repin it. I should say you might want to repin it. So if we wanted to repin this, so what happened? So when I repin it, it's saying to Revit that we want to go back to the type parameters, which we set up previously. So we set these up previously. So for now, what we can do is let's just undo that, leave it unpinned, and that will give us the flexibility that we need to kind of make some modifications. So one thing you should notice is that we've modified that grid, and it's also brought it along with it the curtain wall mullions. Excellent. Say, for instance, we want to modify this just to have a opaque set of panels along this zone. What we can do, just right click, tab select our little system panel family, right click, and then we're going to do select panels along the horizontal grid, come over to our type selector, go to solid. So I would argue this is a pretty conventional way of showing a spandrel panel across an exterior assembly, say for instance, where you're trying to hide the concrete beyond in a floor plate or something like this. Okay, so just some more things on the grid itself. Say, for instance, we want to modify some pieces of the grid. What we can do is we can actually, this is where the curtain wall grid comes in. And I think that this is probably one of the biggest things in Revit is that it's unclear when you're actually using the curtain wall tool that you need to use the wall tool to start it. And then any modifications you want to make afterwards end up functioning in some additional tools here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on our little wall here, our little curtain wall, and I'm going to come over to our curtain grid. So let's just let's click on this, and what you'll see is a little menu shows up, and it says all segments, one segment, this type of thing. And what we can do is we can actually start to introduce some additional grids. So I find this part a little bit frustrating, but just so you could see it, it could be helpful for generating, outside of our family type parameters, we can start to generate some additional mullions, say for instance. So let's say we got a door in here somewhere, call it 2900. And one thing I should mention is that you'll notice that if we want to generate a horizontal grid, we need to be situated on the vertical grid and vice versa, right? So if you're like, why won't it just give me the grid? It's because we need to actually be on another grid line to make that happen, right? So let's just jump here, 2900, and click once. And we see we've generated a new curtain wall grid. Excellent. And now what's happened is we've got this additional grid in here. And I wanted to do this because I know in our best in town example, we've got the curtain wall, but then we also have a door within the curtain wall itself. So curtain wall door functions very similarly to a curtain wall door. Curtain wall door functions very similar to a curtain wall panel. Got to be careful here because in most cases, you're going to be using a curtain wall door family within a curtain wall. You're not using a standard door, you're using a very specific type of door, which is in this case a curtain wall door. One thing we might want to do as well is do one segment instead of all segments. So let's say we wanted to, instead of doing, I've got all segments selected right now, it's going to do across our whole curtain wall. I want an entire piece, right? So vertically, if I click this, it's going to give me that whole wall, that whole height for one moment. I'm going to undo that. I just want to do one piece. Watch this. So if I just want to do one piece, click that. Say we got a little maybe there's a little fire hose cabinet, or excuse me, a little Siamese connection or fire department connection down here. What we can do is you can see how Revit is saying, oh, you just want it in one of the curtain wall family panels. So if I just click here, magic, right? So just one of them. And this can be really helpful when we've got situations where we just want a really small piece of the wall. I'm going to tab select here. A really small piece of the wall to be a solid panel, right? So you imagine maybe we got a little fire hose, excuse me, a little fire department connection in there, something where something's coming out of the wall and it can't necessarily be made of glass. Really hard to cut holes in glass, this type of thing. Cool. Um, Maybe that's a good place to kind of pause on that. Now, one thing we might want to do is let's get this little panel into a door. So I'm just going to tab select to get to our panel. And I know that we don't have a door in here, but I'm just going to show you. So you're going, where the heck is my door? Maybe I just use the door tool. Maybe I just get in the door. Not true. So don't use the door tool for this. What we need to do is we're going to actually need to load the curtain wall door family for this to work. And how we do that, if you remember, we're going to jump to our insert ribbon, load family, and we're looking for the curtain wall door itself. Make sure it's in here. So M door, metric door, curtain wall, single glass. So I've got all of our family set up inside of Blackboard, so you can kind of come and download this metric door, curtain wall, single glass. You would normally have to navigate to a curtain wall family, so a curtain wall door family within your respective Revit interfaces. So I want to load this family. Let's get it in there. Let's hit open. Where is it? Is it in here? Yes, it's in here. So just so you guys know, so it is in here. The tool is not live, so I can't adjust it. I can't insert the door itself. So this functions a little bit different than a kind of standard door, much like how, we were just throwing doors into our walls. In this case, what we need to do is we're going to tab select, get to our system panel, our little glazed panel here, come to our drop down. You can do this a couple different ways. You can type door if you want. There's only going to be one door here because there's not going to be typically doors within our wall type selector for walls. I realize that's confusing. The easiest way to see it, we can see door here. So door, curtain wall, single glass. If you would prefer, you're seeing all these wall types, type door, and we should have door, curtain wall, single glass populate. Boom. Right? So now I'm just going to jump to a plan view so we can kind of see what's going on. But wonderfully, we've got this door now hanging out. So let's just double click level 0. And we see we've got quite a bit of information in here, right? So we've got our door family. We can make some modifications to it. If we want to flip the direction, we can do all that stuff. Again, spacebar does the same thing. And this can be helpful. This is essentially what we've got in our best in town example, except I haven't done any of the mullions. So I leave it to you. If you want to introduce the mullions, totally cool. That is the doors. So one thing, just lastly, you might notice that in our kind of curtain wall family here, you wouldn't normally have a mullion below a door. So if you're ever entering a building or something like this, you don't typically have that rail, what we call the curtain wall rail, extend below a door, right? So it's usually just a transition piece or something like this. So what we can do, if we click just on the zone that's below the door, we can actually just go and, I have to unpin, and then I should be able to delete. So should be able to delete our little piece here. You can see it automatically adjusts. So we've now given ourselves a little bit more height for our door. And we've also eliminated that cross rail below the door itself. Cool, right? So one thing I didn't mention was that when we added in that little curtain wall grid for just this little zone here, we've actually got the whole grid. Revit just dashes in the rest of the grid. So what you don't need to do is say you wanted to have an additional piece of grid here. What you don't need to do is generate a new grid. You just use the existing grid that you had generated for this little piece here. And we can actually add in and remove segments. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll do that again. If I'm hovering over this piece here, I'm going to click on that. We can actually add or remove segments within the curtain wall grid. So you might be thinking, well, this is a dashed line. The grid is there. Unfortunately, it's not how Revit operates, or fortunately. And we actually have to come in and add or remove those segments. So if I go ahead and I'm just going to hit this little add remove segments tool, it's going to be kind of unclear which part I'm selecting, but if I just click here, you can see that it's bringing in a mullion and a live curtain wall. So curtain wall mullion and the grid. So we were going to leave the door inactive, but just so you can see it, double tap escape, get out of the tool. And yeah, so that's pretty close to where we need to be. So I would argue that for our best in town, you can make a couple modifications. We don't really need all of this height. I would suggest that we probably just go up to our roof level. We can keep it all glazed as an example. You do not have to put the mullions in there, just so everybody knows. You don't have to have the mullions. This is just for us to kind of go through as an exercise. But yeah, that being said, that is pretty much wrapped on a curtain wall. I would say a small exercise. So we're just getting into the kind of the tip of the iceberg here, but I wanted to kind of familiarize ourselves with how we're going to get this curtain wall. If you had questions, if you had comments about the actual P4 partition type there for our best in town office, making sure that you have the tools that you need to get that curtain wall within there. So I would say that the biggest hiccup right now is probably, do this super quick so you can see this, 4,500. Set that. I'm going to do this pretty quick just because we're running out of time. We'll set this to level 1 here. Whoops. Excuse me. We'll set the top to level 1. Go ahead and delete some of this stuff. Right. So what I would say is, let's just do it this way. Whoops, up to level 1. Delete element, there we go. Keep it simple, trying to make it simple for you guys. What I would suggest is we actually just, I'm going to get rid of this curtain wall grid. I'm going to get rid of this curtain wall grid up here. And apologies for the quickness here. Whoops. Didn't actually let me. Just delete all these. That's okay. So let's just select all of these panels. Select all instances visible in view, and we're going to make these all just glazed. This is what our best in town roughly, very roughly looks like. Just so you know, like that is just the idea here, just so you have an idea of how to get this in there. If you did have challenges, struggles, I realized we fell off a little bit there. The last thing is actually just tagging it. So if I just jump back to our level 0 here, what we can do is we're actually going to just jump up to the annotate ribbon, go to our tag by category. We should see little P4 populate. It's because we've got it within our type parameter to be P4. So if I just go into our type parameter down here, remember our type mark is P4. So what I'm going to do is, hopefully this is helpful. I realized at the end there was a little bit quick. So what we can do is make sure that if you're not here yet, this is a helpful tutorial just to get to this little curtain wall piece. Curtain walls can be a little challenging, so I appreciate that. But I'll throw this up on YouTube, and you're welcome to check it out. And if you've already got it in your model, then awesome, congratulations, you're done. Probably one of the more complicated pieces of the Revit tutorials here. That being said, thank you everybody for tuning in and checking out. And we're just about 1 hour here, so it's probably the right amount of time. And I'll catch you guys when I see you next, probably on Tuesday. So talk to you then. Okay, thanks everybody.